Oh, hello. I keep forgetting my thing, my cover. Um, I'm excited. I feel like I've been slightly more consistent lately with this. Okay. Page 252, and it's at the top of the page, 5 lines in. And we're in the middle of a big, I honestly remember it being very tedious. We're in a big court case about oh, the upstate guys. Basically, they have this like weird alliance with a power company, and the power company is like giving them land, and people are like, oh, that's great because parks can have more land then, and you can build park. But Robert Moses is mad, but basically he's just like finding any reason to be mad because he wants to take away their power. Okay. But they had not reckoned with the full extent of the change in Robert Moses. The Niagara commissioners felt sure that Downer's report on the hearing would be fair. And they were right. The committee chairman wrote that Schulkopf's and Schulkopf is the power company guy. His only relationship with the commission had been to assist it and have his power company assist it, at considerable expense to both himself and the company. Such criticisms as Downer did not make the commission's operations based on the minor matters discussed at the hearings, dealt with technicalities, and so did his recommendations for changes in procedures. But when the Parks Council met on July 24 with Wilcox exhausted by his earlier trip to New York and the strain of the hearing, again confined to bed, absent, Downer's report was not distributed. Neither was its summary, which contained the exoneration. Instead, its list of recommendations, which concentrated on the technicalities and did not include the exoneration or even mention the big question, which was read. None of it was read. So hastily that an aide Wilcox had sent to take notes was able to gain only a general idea of its contents, and the innocuous recommendations were adopted. Okay, so they just read it really hastily. Wilcox's aide asked Henry Lutz to send a copy of the report to Wilcox, and Lutz promised he would do so. On July 30, Wilcox had not received it, and he sent Lutz a telegram asking for it. Lutz did not even reply. On August 3, Wilcox, in bed, unable to determine what the report about him said or if it had been sent to the rest of the Park Council, wrote Lutz. His letter was, considering the provocation, one of remarkable courtesy. The harshest line in it was its last. If there is a copy of the report in existence or available, I should be glad to have it as soon as convenient. Lutz did not reply, but Moses did. The first sentence of his letter to Wilcox was, I will pass over, without extended comment, the unpleasant tone of your letter. I presume that you have become so accustomed to addressing people in this way that you are hardly aware of its effect on others. Wow, crazy too that like when you sent the letter, you didn't have a way to check what you wrote in the letter. So maybe you would be gaslit into being like, "Oh, I was rude, I guess, maybe." He was writing, Moses said, to defend Lutz from Wilcox's attacks. Downer's report, Moses said, was not ready, although the Parks Council had adopted its conclusions, and the action taken by the council has been outlined to the governor. An astounded Wilcox realized that Moses had sent a copy of Moses's letter, to the 72 other regional commissioners without sending them a copy of Wilcox's letter, and therefore the commissioners could have no way of knowing that Wilcox's letter had not in fact been unpleasant, and they could not know the events that had led up to it. This is so interesting. Since Wilcox's letter was not insulting, Like, this is I feel like when I'm reading this, I'm like, "Wait, this is how girls fight, not boys." Being like, "Oh, what a rude response," when the thing wasn't even rude. This is very catty. That's definitely the correct word. Since Wilcox's letter was not insulting, why did Moses say it was? In Wilcox's view, Moses realized that the Downer report would not make the Niagara commissioners look bad to the other regional commissioners and would not justify to Smith what he had almost certainly told Smith about them. That he therefore needed another issue to divert attention from the main one, and that he seized on Wilcox's innocuous letter as the whole cloth out of which to manufacture it. This is like he should be a reality TV producer. In any case, his handling of the letter was consistent with his other actions in the matter. He had sent the 73 regional commissioners copies of Smith's letter implying wrongdoing by the Niagara Commission, but he had not sent the regional commissioners. He had not even let them know of the existence of the Niagara Commission's resolutions that gave its side of the story. He had read at a Parks Council meeting Downer's recommendations, which seemed to find some fault, however minor, with the commission, but not the summary which exonerated the commission of the major charges. And now he accused Wilcox of writing an abusive letter to a council employee without allowing the regional commissioners to see the letter for themselves and to see that it was not abusive. It is impossible to avoid. This is like one of my favorite parts of the book so far. This is so funny to me. It is impossible to avoid the conclusion that Moses had determined to hound from the state park organization a group of elderly men whose only he's dying in bed, whose only crime was their refusal to allow him to exercise unbridled power in that organization and to remove them from control of the park they loved, the park that one of them had created, the park to which they had given so much of their lives. When he received Moses' letter, Wilcox, who had been confined at home, weak and in pain since his trip to New York, left his bed and went to his office to dictate a reply. He was unable to stay there long or to work in substantial stretches, and it took him 5 days to finish it. But he finished it, and although its main purport was to exonerate himself from charges of discourtesy and dishonesty, it was also a telling document in charting the evolution of Robert Moses. Okay, and then this is a quote. "You speak from a high position," Ansley Wilcox wrote. All right, and then it's smaller font, so I'm assuming that means that it's a quote from probably the letter. "Seemingly, this should bring with it a feeling of responsibility and consideration, not merely a sense of dominating authority and a desire to have your own way without opposition in all matters, large and small. It might have led you to show some special consideration to the Niagara Commission and commissioners, owing to their age and long service and the expertise of all of them, giving them an intimate knowledge of many special local problems which you and other members of the State Council, however wise and experienced in general, are only able to guess at. And owing to the desperate illness and disability of Judge Clearwater, our president, and partial disabilities of Mr. DeForest and myself. But it has not produced any such consideration, quite the contrary. Our commission and its members have been treated by you unfairly and brutally to a degree which cannot be expressed in polite language." Wow. Okay, so that's from nearly dead Ansley Wilcox, who spent his entire life building parks near Niagara Falls. Okay. "Your rage toward Justice Clearwater and me," Wilcox wrote Moses, "is a poisonous thing. And what," Wilcox asked, "is the reason for it? Nothing but the fact that, while supporting in general your park policies, we have ventured on occasion to speak out in meetings views opposing your policies, and have beaten them more than once. This could not be forgotten." Wilcox denied that his letter to Lutz had been abusive. "Neither you nor anyone can point out anything offensive in my letter to Mr. Lutz, except to one conscious of trying to play tricks, who finds himself caught and exposed. I was feeling indignant, but I had a right to be indignant," Wilcox wrote. "You accused us of dishonesty. Yes, it was you. You were responsible for the vicious rumors that came up in Parks Council meetings when neither Clearwater nor I were present to repudiate them. You wrote the letter signed by Smith. Quote, the letter does not sound at all like Governor Smith, and it does sound like you. And then when Downer's report showed us to be innocent, you did not let us or anyone else see the report. Probably the governor has not seen it either, Wilcox wrote. You say that the action taken by the council has been outlined to the governor. I am sure it has, by you, I suppose, and in your own way. Wilcox's letter, which detailed his transactions and relations with the power company, covered 10 single-spaced typewritten pages. That is too long, I know well, he concluded. Few will read it, and probably none will appreciate it. It's so sad that he's like dying, and this is what he has to deal with on his deathbed. This man should just be getting pumped up with hospice drugs. The old man was right. His letter lay unread in an unopened folder in a dusty Albany warehouse for 42 years. And although in the 43rd year the folder was opened by the author and the letter was read, and although it provided the first detailed account of the changes wrought in Robert Moses by his hunger for power, it could not right the worst of all the injustices Moses perpetuated on Ansley Wilcox. During Moses's long reign as State Parks Council chairman, the plaques previously placed in Niagara State Park by Wilcox's friends to commemorate the contributions to the park made by him and the other old Niagara commissioners were systematically removed to be replaced with plaques bearing Moses's name. He's becoming a cartoon villain suddenly. This is the first time we've seen him be this craven. When the parkway along the Niagara Gorge was built, it was named after Moses, and so was the power dam that became the centerpiece of the park. By the time Moses' reign was over, it would be impossible to find anywhere in Niagara State Park even a single hint that anyone except Moses had been responsible for its creation. Wilcox's letter had no appreciable effect on Moses. With it, Wilcox sent a request for the names and addresses of the 72 other regional commissioners to whom you sent your abusive and misleading and unfair and domineering letter, so that he could send copies along with copies of his letter to Lutz. So you could send copies of the original letter to all the commissioners. They could judge for themselves. Moses never replied. Instead, he continued his assault on the old men, if by more roundabout means. If he could not oust them quickly, his actions seemed to indicate he would wear them down. First, a series of charges were filed against the commissioner's superintendent and chief executive officer, Emil R. Waldenberger. The commissioners investigated and cleared him. Then Moses told Smith that because of the illnesses of Judge Clearwater, Wilcox, and DeForest, the commission was not functioning, and in March 1927, Smith asked DeForest, in the most delicate of terms because of DeForest's great prestige, if he might not prefer a post on the State Housing Board instead. DeForest had, in fact, long wanted to resign. Oh, look, Pearl here. Pearl's here. Hi, Pearl. Do you like this section? Robert Moses is being so crazy. But the old men were loyal to their compatriots. I would rather not put myself in the position of deserter, he replied. Yeah, I know. He was a really nice guy a couple chapters ago. He would just do weird shit, like go and swim all the time and kayak on the weekends and work a lot. But now he's evil. In reality, Clearwater had confounded his doctors and recovered months before. DeForest sent a copy of Smith's letter to the judge, and the judge wrote a letter of his own. He still had the gift of words. The governor's letter seems like a wound in the house of a friend, he wrote. I have for him a great admiration. He has all the elements of greatness and none of its limitations. That was a great line. Unfortunately, some men greatly his inferior have secured access to him and to a considerable extent have his confidence, which unhesitatingly they abuse to gratify their ambitions, their interests, and their animosities. By them, he at times has been misinformed. Basically, he's just saying, like, Al Smith is corrupt because of how um how Robert Moses has no limits, I think. The commission has been functioning, the judge wrote. Would the governor like to know how? And he proceeded to list page after page of extensive land acquisition negotiations that had been carried out in recent months. He knew why Moses was lying, the judge wrote. The situation at Niagara affords opportunities for spectacular publicity not offered by any other of the state parks. And there are members of the Council of Parks who desire to dominate it in order to capitalize those opportunities for their own glorification. Furthermore, he was not afraid to speak out against those of Moses's policies with which he did not agree. Now, there seems to be a somewhat widespread feeling that because of the governor's friendship for him, Mr. Moses expects an attitude of abject acquiescence from the members of council, and that unless he receives it, reprisals may be expected. Moses let the not functioning issue drop. But time is not on the side of old men. We're being so mean to the old people in this chapter. The progress of Wilcox's disease was slow but steady. In July 1927, he was forced to resign from the commission, and Smith accepted Moses's recommendation on his replacement. Then Moses convinced the governor that the activities of the Niagara Commission could not be adequately carried out unless the commission made the new member its executive officer with full powers to act for it. And the new member is one of the Moses pals. He convinced the governor not to sign any appropriations for the Niagara Park unless the old commissioners gave the new one this power. In order to realize their dream, in order even to keep functioning the park they loved, the old men were forced to turn it over to someone else. At the end of the fight for control of Niagara State Park, Robert Moses had won. He won every fight in the State Parks Council. By the end of 1928, most recalcitrant regional commissioners had been replaced as their terms expired by men amenable to administration of their parks by the council's central staff, which, through Lutz, took orders from Moses. To further ensure that votes within the council would no longer hinge on the changeable margin of a single vote, 2 new members were named, the state historian, directly appointed by Smith, and the president of a new regional commission, all of whose members were appointed by Smith. Parks had never been a source of power before. Since the traditional function of park commissions had been to preserve the land in its natural state, the later developments, construction contracts, jobs that made parks a source of power had never been a significant consideration. Parks were a source of power now, but the old parkmen didn't want power. They just wanted to be left alone to preserve and pass on beauty to other generations. And when, as in the case of the Erie County Parkway, the chance for power came their way, they backed away from it. Politicians failed to grasp the new reality until too late. By the time they finally realized, one can see the realization growing in their correspondence of 1927 and 28, that a new organ of state government was being created that would dispose yearly millions of dollars in construction contracts and thousands of jobs. Moses had the state park system too firmly in his control for it to be pried loose. He would remain president of the Long Island State Park Commission and chairman of the State Parks Council until 1962. And during the 38 years of his reign over state parks, these parks would, even as his activities expanded into other fields, be a constant source of power that he could use to expand his influence in those fields. In politics, power vacuums are always filled. And the power vacuum in parks was filled by Robert Moses. The old park men saw beauty in their parks. Moses saw beauty too, but he also saw power, saw it lying there in those parks unwanted. And he picked it up and turned it as a weapon on those who had not thought it important and destroyed them with it. Whether or not he so intended, he turned parks, the symbol of man's quest for serenity and peace, into a source of power. Moses could have done nothing, of course, without Al Smith's constant support. The old park men pleaded with the governor for justice. I am very sure that on the same knowledge of facts, there would be no difference at all as to any park matters between you and me, DeForest wrote, and others too told him he was being misled. They asked the governor for appointments so that they could tell him their side of the disputes. But the appointments that they were given were few and far between, and although they didn't know it, most, perhaps all, of the letters they wrote, Smith complaining about Moses, were sent by Smith's office to Moses for suggested replies. And the replies Moses suggested were generally sent out over Smith's signature without a word being changed. The pattern was the same in Moses's relations with the legislature. He might have told Jerry Twomey to stick a bill up his ass, but Twomey told Len Hall, "Within 2 days, Al Smith had me on the phone. I had to put the bill through." The legislature might rage at Robert Moses. Twomey wasn't the only legislature insulted to his face, Hall not the only one on whom he slammed down the telephone. But no legislator dared to stand up to a governor who was a master of every method of bending men to his will. As long as Al Smith stuck by Moses, the legislature could do nothing about him. And Al Smith stuck. In the midst of the Fayetteville fight, with Smith threatened by political embarrassment because of Moses's actions, a wealthy New Yorker who had been a victim of Moses's insults stormed into Smith's office. According to one Smith biographer, he asked angrily, "Do you want to settle this park fight?" "Yes," the governor said. "Then I'll tell you how to do it." "How?" The visitor banged his fist on the governor's desk. "Get rid of Moses," he shouted. The governor leaped to his feet, his face suddenly purple with rage. "Get out of my office, you idiot!" he roared. Why Smith stuck was a question that had many answers. Yeah, that was one of the very rare pieces of dialogue in this entire book. Okay. One reason Smith stuck around Moses was that he was a politician. In Capitol corridors, Moses may have been a handicap to the governor, but in voting booths, the parks that he built were a priceless asset to Smith. About Colonel Frederick Stuart Greene, the short story writing engineer who refused to consider politicians' wishes in awarding contracts, but who got roads built that won voters' appreciation, Smith once said, "He may be a devil in May, but he's an angel in November." And the governor might have said the same about Moses. I wonder if Greene is the reason for Fort Greene Park. I don't know. In 1926, desperate to derail the governor before the 1928 presidential campaign, oh yeah, Al Smith ran for president. The state GOP ran against him, its strongest candidate, Congressman Ogden Livingston Mills. Campaigning vigorously, Mills tried to focus voters' attention on the unprecedented expenditures of Smith's administration. But the governor easily diverted them by reminding them over and over that Mills was one of the North Shore barons, that a small handful of wealthy millionaires on Long Island said, "We do not want the rabble from New York coming down into our beautiful country." Smith won a fourth term, the first governor to do so since DeWitt Clinton a century before. He must be the reason for Clinton Street, right? Or maybe not, I don't know. And he credited a large part of his 250,000 vote plurality to the parks issue. Smith was not only a politician, He was a Tammany politician. In the simple Tammany Code, the first commandment was loyalty, capital L. Smith's loyalty to his appointees was legendary. Once he gave a man a job, he was fond of saying he never interfered with him unless he proved himself incapable of handling it. Oh, it's renamed for Nathaniel Greene, an American Revolutionary War hero. Bummer. Oh well. And Smith knew that none of his appointees worked harder for him than Moses. When his daughter, Emily, Al Smith's daughter, Emily, her father's confidant, and perhaps the person who best understood him, was asked why her father stuck by Moses, she would begin her analysis by saying simply, Bob worked so hard for father, you know. Beyond politics was the fact that the boy from the Fulton Fish Market wanted so passionately to improve the lives of the people of the Fourth Ward and of 100 Fourth Wards throughout the state. And parks were, unlike improvements in teacher salaries or other highly praised but unmeasurable accomplishments of his administration, an accomplishment that he could see, an accomplishment whose visible, concrete existence could prove to him that he had done, indeed, something for his people. When he saw families picnicking under the tall trees at Valley Stream or swimming at Sunken Meadow, he could feel that he had measurably improved their lives. So many of the things that made him most satisfied with his administration had really been the result of Moses' work. As for his refusal to listen to Moses' opponents, Smith was well aware, as a politician, that every public improvement causes outcries. You can't get a road built if you're going to listen to every farmer who doesn't want it to go across his land, he often said. Listening to protesters undermined his appointee and got himself involved in enemy-making situations. Staying out of such situations, leaving responsibility with his appointee, enabled him to stay out of the fights which attended upon the building of public improvements, while still allowing him to take full credit for their completion. Moreover, most of Moses' opponents, after all, were upstate legislators or politicians. Smith knew the depth of their reactionism, their narrow-mindedness, their utter inability to understand the needs of the city masses. As Emily put it, Father wouldn't care. It's weird when she calls him father to me. Father wouldn't care what Bob did or said to the GOP legislators. After all, Father was fighting them himself. And Father thought the legislators really were terribly wrong. He felt the things Bob wanted to do were right. In the opinion of those close to the governor, he didn't realize how drastic. I wonder if Emily's still alive. Because she would have, probably not. She would have to be like 100. Okay, probably not. In the opinion of those close to the governor, he didn't realize how drastic the methods were that Moses was using to accomplish his aims. He didn't understand that Moses was going beyond the actions of other appointees, handling protesters with needless harshness, stirring up protests by his arrogance, creating problems where there need not have been problems. Particularly with little people, Emily says, I didn't think that Father really knew how Moses was treating them. And there was, of course, no reason why the governor would. They didn't have his ear, or, since he seldom read even memos from appointees and almost never letters from the public, they didn't have his eye. And the press, which might have publicized their complaints, was firmly in Moses' corner. Behind the political considerations, there were the personal. Al Smith was a fighter, and he liked fighters. One night, Smith heard Richard Childs introducing Moses at a dinner, smilingly telling his audience, "You all know Bob, of course. He's so forthright and honest that if he saw a man across the street who he thought was a son of a bitch, he would cross the street and call him a son of a bitch, lest by passing him in silence, his silence be misconstrued." Smith roared at the description, and thereafter, when there's like a symphony of honks right now, Smith roared at the description, and thereafter, when someone would criticize Moses, the governor would often give it himself with evident delight. That's a really crazy anecdote. Yeah, this is such an aggressive chapter. There's so much and Moses reciprocated. I'm probably going to read the one more page so that I can end on Oh my God, I'm definitely going to read one more page because that way I can end at the chapter break. And the next chapter is chapter 15 called You Will Never Guess This. Of all the chapter names, possibilities in the world, this would be like really low on my list of guesses. Curator of cauliflowers. Okay, but that's in a page. We're not there yet. Moses reciprocated. He knew how much he owed Smith for the realization of his dream. We could have done nothing without him, he would say. He knew how much he owed Smith for rescuing him from a life of obscurity and failure. Most of what little I know of the practice of government I learned from this remarkable Gamaliel, Moses would write. I don't know what Gamaliel means. It feels like one of those words I should probably know. Oh, it's a word for teacher. Oh, it's like a word for teacher that goes back to a long time ago, and it might be in the Bible. I don't know. Okay. Gamaliel. Without him, I would have been just another academic researcher. After the governor's death in 1944, Moses wrote, "The few remaining members of the Smith Brigade think of him often and at the strangest times. We see him in moments of action and relaxation, inspiration and ease. We hear his rough voice." Moses may have mocked to their faces men of wealth and influence and insulted the most powerful members of the state legislature. He treated Al Smith with the respect that to those who saw the two men together was unforgettable. Said Bell Moskowitz's son, Carlos Israels, when Moses was with Smith, he would always be spouting out ideas, pacing, gesticulating, talking. But it was the talking and gesticulating of an enthusiastic boy with his father, a father tired and to whom he was very respectful. Joseph Proskauer said, I don't know who that is, he acted to Smith as he acted to no one else, with deference and respect. Smith was always governor to Moses. He never addressed him, either in letters or in speech, as anything but governor. And this was a fact more significant with Robert Moses than it would be with other men. Moses would, during the 40 years after Smith left Albany, serve under 5 other governors. He never addressed them in letters or in speech, except by their first names. He never called any one of them governor. For Robert Moses, there would always be only one governor. During the final years of Smith's reign, he and Moses became closer and closer. Smith saw that Moses was invited to the most intimate of Tammany's soirees, the notoriously boisterous get-togethers at William F. Kenny's Tiger Room. The Tammany bigwigs, who had looked at him askance, soon came to like him, and when they mentioned this to Smith, the governor would beam happily. Often after dinner in the executive mansion, or in New York, in the Biltmore suite, or a friend's apartment, Smith would say, if Moses had not been present at the dinner, I wonder what Bob's doing tonight. Let's get him. Someone would call Moses. When he arrived, Smith would say, Bob, let's go to Dinty Moore's. I don't know who that is. And the two men would, Dinty Moore's must be a bar. And the two men would sit for hours in a back room specially reserved for the governor, drinking beers, cracking crabs, and talking. That talk was something, Howard Coleman would recall. You could tell, just listening to the two of them, that there were two men with real brains. Not that the talk was all serious. Often the governor and Moses would, to the delight of listeners, go into a sort of rapid-paced comic dialogue on the Albany scene. Says Emily Smith, it would be more fun to be there listening to Father and Bob than to be out at a theater or dancing somewhere. Or Smith would, if there was a piano handy, jump up, walk over to it, and say to Moses, come on, Bob, let's show these people what we can do. One of the men who watched Smith and Moses harmonizing on such occasions says, there was a tie there that was beyond business or politics. Says another, you could tell just by looking at the two of them together that they liked each other a lot. And that's the end of the chapter. This is like 2 chapters in a row that ended on not really zingers. Actually, this last page is really fun. Okay, and that was chapter 14. So now it's chapter 15, Curator of Cauliflowers. And even though I'm so curious, I'm not going to start because I want to save it for tomorrow. Emily died in 1980. Okay, so she's like extremely not alive anymore. I'm kind of curious about this William F. Kenny Tiger Room. Also, okay, a little detail that I forgot about until I was reading something about this. Where did I remind? I can't remember why I remembered this. But do you remember how in Albany, one of the governors, it might have been Al Smith, was really into exotic animals and kept like lions and tigers or something like that in Albany? I can't remember who it was, but I'm gonna look it up. The New York State Executive Mansion must have been where it was. I'm searching for keywords like lions and pets. Lion, tiger. Okay, the Wikipedia article for the New York State Executive Mansion does not mention anything about it. Oh, wait. Yeah, wait. Look at this. Okay, I'm on albany.org, and there's apparently a walking tour about the animals of Albany. And yeah, apparently Al Smith had monkeys at the governor's mansion. There was an entire zoo in the back of the governor's mansion, and there was a monkey that went missing. Like, I know that this book is really thorough and that the focus is on like power, but I really think that we could have gotten a few more paragraphs about the monkeys. Like, I would not mind this being a few extra pages, like to be instead of 1162 if it were 100 if it was 1163, if we got more monkey content, that would have been nice. I should read about Heidelberg Castle if I like rich people keeping monkeys. I do. I just like I do like that stuff. Okay. See you later.